Thank you. Did you perform an examination of the Solaris 9 machine?
Yes, I did. Forensics exam on the disk and on the volatile memory.
And if you turn to tab 73 times pi, do you recognize this document?
Yes, that's my forensics report.
Okay. And Your Honor, I would move that into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Submitted.
Okay, now, Mr. Klein, could you please tell the jury what it is you found on the Solaris 9 machine?
I found evidence that a hacker had installed a backdoor on the system.
Okay, and then...
Objection, Your Honor. This is wholly irrelevant, and this is far beyond the scope of the expert disclosures. This was not reflected in the report that we were provided.
All right, one moment. Let's not have any speaking objections in front of the jury. I think we knew this was going to happen. I think we're going to ask the jury to step out of the room for a moment, and we will have a sidebar on this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. This happens sometimes. It's between the lawyers and the judge, and the bailiff has now removed the jury. So please step forward.
Someone's actually leaving.
Mr. Bankson, would you state your objection, please?
Your Honor, the forensics report that we were provided in a timely manner includes nothing about any kind of backdoor from any hacker. All we have are supplements to the report that were provided to us only this morning, which we haven't even had time to review. This is wholly prejudicial and far outside the scope of his expert disclosures.
Mr. O?
Your Honor, now that the jury is out of our presence, may I offer that we present a proffer of the evidence that we're going to present, and I think you'll see that it's well within the scope of our timely disclosures.
Let me ask you this. Have you made any disclosures on the defense expert?
Absolutely. So we timely complied with the rules, and we, within the time limits specified there, turned over the exhibit with the expert report, and we supplemented those 24 hours ago.
24 hours ago you supplemented?
Yes, but it was just an expansion of what we had said in our earlier report.
All right. Do you have any objection to my hearing what the expert would testify to if would be allowed?
Of course not, Your Honor.
All right. I'd like to hear that so you can somewhat dispense with the rules of evidence here. I'd like to understand through your witness what it is you would have the jury hear.
Great. Thank you. So, Mr. Klein, because the jury's no longer in the room, I'm going to have you speak to the judge and let him know what you would testify to if we're permitted to present this testimony. So what did you find on that Solaris 9 machine?
So the first thing I started looking at was the volatile data collected by Special Agent Carroll. I'd like to request Defense Exhibit 1, please.
Yeah, and we're no longer moving into evidence, but if we could present
I'd like
Exhibit
to
1.
see Defense Exhibit 1.
So this is the output from an Nmap run from another machine against the Solaris 9 machine that Agent Carroll had run. And in this particular case, it's looking at TCP connections from ports 1 to 65,535. We're looking for anything that is going to be opened or is answering.
Well, as a federal judge, I'm very familiar with Nmap.
So, in other words, Your Honor, what we're looking for is everything that this computer is listening to with respect to an outside connection.
Okay, and then what did you do next?
So if please go to Defense Exhibit 2. So the first thing I started to do was eliminate all the ports that I would know about. So in this instance, I ran a netstat command, and I grepped for anything being listened on. So these are all of the ports with which a process is listening for a connection from the outside. I was able to cross-reference all of these ports against known services in the INET superdaemon or within standalone services.
And again,
so
just to clarify,
this
you weren't running these live commands on a machine. This was the output of
by
what Agent
Special
Carroll did.
Agent Carroll.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. What did you do next?
So next, I ask that you go to Defense Exhibit 3, please. So in this case, now I looked at the remote procedure calls. These are registered programs on the machine using the port mapper associated with Solaris. So these are services that are registered in a different mechanism than the INET superdaemon. And I correlated all of the ports that were being listened to based on RPC and removed them from the list.
And next, what did you do next?
Well, so that left me with port 33003 as the only port I couldn't account for.
Okay, and so how'd you proceed from there?
So I looked through the system to see if I can find any reference to port 3303, and if the clerk would please move to Defense Exhibit 4. I was able to find that 33003 was defined in Etsy Services as a registered service called dbserve.
Okay, and what'd you do next?
Well, so at this point, I wanted to look at all open file descriptors on the system to see if I could figure out what was associated with 33003. So using the data collected by Agent Carroll, I looked at the LSOF data, and that would be Defense Exhibit 5. So as you can see in Defense Exhibit 5, there is a connection being listened on dbserve, which translates to 33003. The name of the program is SQL data, and the process ID is 1883. So what that tells me is there is a program running on the system called SQL data, and at the time the system was running, it had a process ID of 1883. If the clerk would please move to Defense Exhibit 6. This is additional LSOF data, and what I found interesting was that some of the libraries being used by SQL data involved network programs. And I find that kind of strange for an SQL data program. In fact, I found the whole idea of an SQL data program to be kind of strange. To me, that seems like it should be a data file, not a program.
So what did you do to investigate this idea you had?
Well, so I started getting very suspicious. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to find this SQL data. So if we could please move to Defense Exhibit, I'm sorry, yes, we want to move to Defense Exhibit 7. I wanted to see what process 1883 is. Now what really struck me funny is if you will look at the bottom of the slide, process ID 1883 is user sbin vol-d, which in Solaris is the Solaris volume manager. It handles all requests for removable media to be mounted and unmounted from the system. So again, I found this rather strange since I was looking for a program called SQL data and it was calling itself user sbin vol-d. That is not normal.
Okay, and so what'd you do to investigate?
So now I'm really getting suspicious. I want to find this file. So if we can move to Defense Exhibit 8, I used the find command to search through the entire system looking for any reference to SQL data. So at the top of the exhibit, you'll notice the find command grepping for SQL data, and I found one instance, opt local SQL data. I proceeded to do what's called a long listing on that command to determine what its permissions were. And if you will notice, it's read, write, read, read. The interesting thing about this is that for a program to execute on the system, it must have execute permission, and if you'll notice, execute permission is missing off that file.
Okay.
I further looked in this directory by doing a long listing and looking for every file in that directory. I found an additional file, SQL clean, which is an executable program. You'll notice at the bottom, I did an ls-a at. Now, in Solaris 9, the concept of an extended file attribute was added, similar to what Microsoft uses as extended attributes on Microsoft systems. And if you will notice in the first line, after the end of the directory entry, there is an @ sign. What that indicated to me was there was an extended attribute associated with that directory.
Okay.
Now, the one problem with trying to find this is that the tools looking for extended attributes don't run consistently in a Solaris system. So if you're not careful, it's very easy to miss this.
But as such a qualified expert, you were careful, I imagine.
I was very careful
Thank
with
you.
this, yes.
Okay.
So I have some very strange circumstances here where I have this SQL data that's not really a program, and I have an extended attribute on the directory. I decided I needed to start digging further.
Okay, and so how did you do that?
So I started looking through the system, looking for anything, any file associated with SQL data. And through my examination, I found a cron job referencing SQL data. If the clerk would please move to Defense Exhibit 9. If you will notice at the bottom, this is an entry for a cron job, which says run every hour, opt local SQL clean / opt local SQL data.
What did this tell you?
Well, what it looked like to me was that every hour this SQL data file in this SQL directory was being cleaned, maybe old data that needed to be compressed out. looked fairly innocuous. I would say anybody looking at it would say there's nothing wrong with this, but since I saw the extended attribute on the SQL directory, I decided to examine it further.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. How did you do that?
So I got suspicious of the SQL clean binary. So if we could please move to Defense Exhibit 10. So within the Solaris system, within Sun Microsystems maintains what's called a Solaris fingerprint database. And what they do is they maintain an MD5 checksum of every binary issued with every Solaris system, I believe starting with Solaris 8, so that an administrator or an investigator could look at a binary and tell exactly what that binary was. So I decided that I want to send up SQL clean to see what it was, see if it showed up anywhere in the Sun fingerprint database. So the way to do that is you collect the MD5 checksum off of the file, and then you run this sfpc.pl script provided by Sun Microsystems to submit that MD5 checksum to the database.
And what did you discover from the database?
So as you can see from the return on the database, our friendly program SQL clean is actually a Solaris binary user bin run at.
And what does run at do?
So if we please move to Defense Exhibit 11. What run at does is it allows the capability, it gives you the capability of being able to manipulate the extended attribute space. So for example, I use the run at command, I can copy things into the attribute space, I could list it, I could change the mode of a file, I could change the ownership of a file, and it's all hidden within that attribute space. So I found it very interesting that the run at command was being used in this situation. So now if we go back to Defense Exhibit 9, so if you now look at this cron job, what I'm really doing is a user bin run at on directory opt local SQL, and now I'm manipulating a file called SQL data. So moving to Defense Exhibit 12, I indeed issued the run at command on that directory and looked at what was in there, and as you can see, what SQL data is a binary, set user ID to root, which means this will execute as a super user every time it runs. So every hour, this program is being executed on the system.
Okay, and so what did you do next?
Well, so
Perhaps we could, this has made me rather thirsty. Perhaps we could take a break, 10-minute break?
10 minutes.
A 10-minute break, and I'll wet my whistle and we'll resume with the sidebar discussion.
Thank you.
So we'll be back in 10 minutes.